Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Rissho Kosei-kai. My name is Etsuko Fujita. I am the minister of this Buddhist organization. From here, I will speak Japanese. She will translate for me. Here, her name is Yasuko Bentley. 少しお時間を頂戴いたしましてご挨拶をさせていただきたいと思います。
We'd like to take a moment to introduce ourselves. 実は UUA と立正厚生会との関係はですね、間には、パートナーシップの歴史がございます。 We actually have a history, UUA and Rissho Kosei-kai RK has a history of a partnership.
UUA 初代の会長でいらしたグリリー博士と我々立正厚生会の2羽の日教開祖は深い友情を持ち、共に宗教協力の道を歩み、IARF、WCRP の設立のリーダーシップを取ってきたという関係にございます。
Your first president, Dr. Greeley, and our founder, Nikkyo Niwano, they have a deep relationship, a deep friendship, and they walked a path of the religious cooperation, and they took a leadership to establish International Association for Religious Freedom and World Conference of Religions for Peace.
次に UUA と立正厚生会の、共通性について申し上げます。
Next, I want to talk about the commonality of UUA and RK.
それはそれぞれに我々は信ずるものをもとに社会正義、そして世界平和に貢献していく願いを共に持っているというところでございます。
That is based on what each of us believe. We both have a wish to contribute social justice and world peace.
本日は全米からそしてカナダからお集まりいただきまして軍縮についての会議を持たれ、さらに最後のプログラムでしょうか、パネルディスカッションの会場として我々の教会施設を、使っていただくことは大変嬉しく思っております。
So today you came all over the US and also from some of them from Canada, and you had a meeting about the disarmament, is that right? And this venue, you're going to have a last program for today, is it right? Yes. Yeah. So we are very happy and grateful that you are using our facility as a venue, and you are going to have a panel discussion today.
さて、立正厚生会は2羽の日教開祖により1938年に創立された教団です。
Rissho Kosei-kai was founded 1938 by our founder Nikkyo Niwano.
本日上第四教主釈迦牟尼世尊を本尊とし、法華三部教を書への経典とする在家の教団です。
We are a lay Buddhist organization, and our focus of devotion, as you see, is the Eternal Buddha Shakyamuni, Great Benevolent Teacher, World Honored One. And our main sutra is Threefold Lotus Sutra.
法華経とはどんな教えなのか、 大意を申し上げますと、1、この世とは何か。2、人間はどのような存在なのか。そして3、人間はどうして生きていくべきかを分かりやすく説かれた教えです。
So what is the Lotus Sutra? I'm going to tell you the rough meaning. First, the Lotus Sutra talks about what is this world about. And 2, what is the meaning of the human existence? And 3, how should we live? So those things are written in the Threefold Lotus Sutra.
それはすべての人間が平等に仏になる可能性、仏性を持っていると説くのです。
And it also talks about all human beings. We all equally possess the possibility of possessing the Buddha nature.
法華経の人間観に沿って目の前にいる一人一人を徹底して拝みきる、尊重する、そんな教えでございます。
This is a teaching that gives us the human viewpoint through the Lotus Sutra perspective of revering, respecting one another's Buddha nature in every person we meet.
お釈迦様の悟られた真理を学び、教えを家庭生活や社会生活に実践し、幸福な人生、そして明るい社会、平和な世界を築くことを目指す教団体でございます。
We are the organization trying to learn the truth that Shakyamuni Buddha was awakened to. Through practicing the teaching in our daily and social life. And we aim to build a happy life, right society, and world peace.
皆様と同じ目的に向かって歩んでいる私どもです。どうぞその目的に向かって前進したいと思っております。本日はありがとうございました。Thank you very much.
We are walking towards the same goal as yours. Let's hope to move forward towards our shared goal. Thank you very much.
Arigatou gozaimasu. Thank you so much. Well, as we have learned, we have a deep and abiding relationship with Rissho Kosei-kai that intersects on many different levels. One level that I would like to also highlight is the work that we do together on the NGO Committee on Disarmament, Peace and Security. Hiro Sakurai also is part of that committee, as am I, and Rissho Kosei-kai has been a founding member and also a great contributor to that work. So we will start our panel. We've got a really great panel ahead of us. I want to begin just with a few of my own remarks. And we've talked about nuclear weapons this morning. And the pretext for nuclear weapons has always been deterrence. And what we're finding after some 70 years of having them is that they don't really deter anything. They didn't deter 9/11, they didn't deter ISIS, they didn't deter Russia from invading the Crimea, they're not deterring North Korea from launching their missiles all over the place. They haven't deterred anything. And one of the most interesting facts that has come to my attention recently is that both the French and the British militaries are lobbying their governments to get rid of their nuclear arsenals because it's taking money away from things that they would rather be spending their money on. Not necessarily nice things, it'll be military things, but it's a money pit. It's spending money on something you don't dare use. The only purpose of having and using nuclear weapons is global suicide. That's the only thing they're good for. So why do you want to continue to put money into a global suicide machine? Because that's what it's all about. So we're going to delve into this topic a little bit more in this panel. As I said, we've got a really great panel in front of us. And we're going to start with a very good friend, somebody who has really been a magnificent spokesperson on so many important issues. Ambassador Caleb Otto is just recently, he's stepped down as being the ambassador from Palau. And he's really been a very important voice on climate change issues, on nuclear disarmament issues. And of course, his country has suffered from nuclear testing in the Pacific. And so he will address some of those issues. He also mentioned to me that Palau had a certain history of gun violence, and they have outlawed guns in Palau, and they have benefited from that legal abolition of small arms on the island. So please welcome Ambassador Caleb Otto.
Thank you, Bruce, for that very kind introduction. Excuse me. The Lord will mediate between nations and will settle international disputes. They will hammer their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nuclear plants and testing sites into botanical gardens and arboretums. That last one I made. Nation will no longer fight against nation, nor train for war anymore. These are words from Isaiah, prophet. You find them in the Bible. Isaiah 2, verse 4. You can also find them engraved in the wall on 43rd Street, just across from the United Nations. So you see the United Nations had this idea about peaceable kingdom. It's what we're about. I want to thank Bruce and Joanne and the committee from UUA for the invitation for this event. I want to thank Rissho Kosei-kai for the use of this building for this event. My name is Caleb, and I come from a very tiny island of Palau. You have 20,000 people, probably the size of one high school in New York. This tiny island nation we became a nation in 1981. We got our constitution. And in 1994, we became independent from the United States, and we became a member of the United Nations. We have a very aversive feeling about war, and we have taken measures about that globally and in the nation for individuals. So globally, we have our constitution is probably the first nuclear-free constitution. And in Article 13, Section 6, we will find that Palau will not store, will not produce, will not use nuclear energy of any kind. In our National Code, Title 33, we have prohibited the use of firearms, weapons, guns. Nobody can have guns, including the police. The only time that the police can use guns is if the president allows them for a specific purpose, for a specific time, and never would they use them during offers. So why do we have such an aversion for war in Palau? So Palau, Palau is a group of islands, and I'm from one of the islands of Palau. It's called Palau. You can Google it, and you can read all about the Battle of Palau. It took place on September 15, from September 15 to November 27. 3 months of very, very tough battles. It was a battle fought between the United States and Japan in the Second World War. And the people from Palau, there were about 700 people on that island. We were all evacuated, taken out of our island to another island. And we all came back after the war to an island that was completely devastated. Nothing was, there was no plants, it was just like a desert. I was a baby then, and so that shows my age. And my parents were evacuated to the main island of Palau. So war is a very visible in the lives of the people in Palau. They know about war because we are very close to Japan, and we have visitors from Japan who come almost daily and for sure annual visits from Japan to visit the shrines of all the soldiers who died in Palau. The war was supposed to be 4 days. They thought that it only takes 4 days to complete the war in Palau, and it took actually 3 months. It was meant to be the last battle before the United States armed forces would go into Japan, the mainland of Japan. And as it turned out, it was not the case. But this is the reason why we have such an aversion towards war. So Palau is in the westernmost part of the group of islands called Micronesia. In the Pacific, there are 3 groups of islands: Micronesia, Melanesia, and Polynesia. So Micronesia is from Palau all the way to the Marshall Islands. The reason why I want to give you this little geographic elaboration is because from Micronesia, from Palau, we are very close to Japan, all the way to the Marshall Islands. It's like from Los Angeles to New York. And in Marshall Islands, from 1946 to 1974, the United States carried out nuclear testings in the Marshall Island atolls. So until today, the people of the Marshall Islands are still reaping the impacts of those testing. And I will go into that a little bit later. But the other groups of Pacific Islands, the Polynesians, also has the Mururoa atolls, in which the French government carried out nuclear testings. And those of you who come to the United Nations, in April, the indigenous people come and talk about their problems, and you will hear the indigenous people from Tahiti, from Mururoa Atoll, from Polynesia come and talk about the devastations that these nuclear testings had done for them. So why is it that we are so against nuclear power? First of all, because we are such small islands, such tiny people, we have no resources, we have no voice. We can scream and shout, but at the end of the day, it's the big nations who make the decisions about what's going to happen to us. There is a movie called Verdict by Paul Newman, and in that movie, it's about how the surgeons were so powerful and they did something wrong to a patient. At the end of the day, the nurse who quit her job, her statement was, who are these people that they have so much power over lives? And at the UN, whenever I have advocated for human rights, be it human rights for water, be it human rights against the tobacco industry, be it the human rights for breast milk, against breast milk substitutes, or against nuclear. It's all about who are these people that they have so much power over other people. So think about this. It's unethical. The cost to the people in the health. The people from the Marshall Islands until today have the highest rate of thyroid cancers. And in Palau, I have seen, I'm a public health doctor, so I have seen over the years the increase in thyroid cancers, in addition to thyroid cancers. The reason why we talk about thyroid cancer is they have direct relations to the nuclear energy. So over the years, we have very little resources for health, and those little resources for health now we have to spend on the few people who have thyroid cancers. We have to refer them to Hawaii, we have to refer them to the Philippines, we have to refer them to Taiwan for care, and that's costly. So cancers and non-communicable diseases for us takes about 70% of our total Ministry of Health budget. And this is for a developing nation, a nation that has very little resources. We have to come and beg for resources to help us to implement the sustainable development. And yet, we spend so much of our money on health. So this is the reason why we have such an aversion to implements of violence. And it's not just at the global level. Like I said, we also have in our law prohibited. So one of the things that I have advocated for is also for the prohibition of small weapons and small arms, because we have real problems. We have daily flights from Japan, from Philippines, from Korea, and from Guam, from the United States. We don't know who is trying to import or trying to bring small arms. So for us, it's very important. So it's 25 years if you are caught with small arms in prison. The last thing that I think I want to say about this is about, I think we have turned this Bible verse around. It's supposed to be, when we read it, it only talks about the plowshares, how we turn the plowshares into pruning hooks. And if you go back and look at it at the United Nations, that it completely misses the first part, which is about God. It will be God who will mediate disputes of the nations. And if we leave him out of our mediations, we will forever be fighting at the Security Council to not. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Our next speaker actually has a UU connection. Janet Nordstrom was your boss, right?
Oh, Jennifer, yes.
Jennifer Nordstrom is the senior minister at the UU congregation in Milwaukee. And so Ray Acheson heads up Reaching Critical Will. And I'm going to try to describe what she does. I see her kind of like an orchestra conductor. And there are a lot of us that are involved in disarmament affairs and anti-nuclear affairs, and she's kind of the conductor, and she kind of gets us all together, and she kind of points us all out. We all kind of play our parts, and then she sums everything up, and she pulls it all together as we're meeting with member states and other actors. And it's masterful, actually, what she does. She's got a great bio. I'm not going to read it because I think what I'm saying about her is probably more important. She really is a great coordinator of the anti-nuclear movement. She knows everything there is to know about NPT and all the work here at the United Nations. A very exciting movement right now to try to ban nuclear weapons, with over 130 countries supporting that. So please welcome Ray Acheson.
So I thought that I would pick up on a point that Ambassador Otto raised about the big powers and those dynamics that typically play out that dictate what Palau can do and what other small nations can do. And this notion that there's big countries and little countries and important countries and not so important countries. And just to say that last week at the United Nations, we turned all of that on its head. And we were having a little bit of a revolution at the UN. It was not televised. What was televised was the US ambassador standing outside of the conference room, basically picketing what we were doing inside of the conference room. So we had this very strange dynamic where the most important country was, outside protesting, while you had NGOs inside the room negotiating with states for a new treaty of international law. It was quite a strange dynamic. But that brought us a lot of mainstream media to what we were doing, which we probably otherwise wouldn't have had. So thank you, US government, for that. How did all this happen? I want to backtrack a little bit, because it's a really fascinating story that I think is really useful for anyone working on any social justice issue, but also more complicated by the fact that we're doing this with governments in a venue that is housing all governments in the world. The number one starting point for this treaty banning nuclear weapons is concern about human lives. This has always been the backbone of the anti-nuclear movement in the United States, across Europe, around the world. Ever since nuclear weapons were first used in Japan in 1945, we have seen outcry about the catastrophic humanitarian and environmental consequences. But what happened with the end of the Cold War is most people thought that the issue was going to be solved by the United States and Russia reaching an agreement, entering into arms control arrangements with each other, and the numbers of nuclear weapons did come down from about 80,000 at the height of the Cold War to these days it's about 15,000. So that sounds pretty good, except that there's still 15,000 nuclear weapons, which is kind of horrific. And this is where it stopped, and now we're turning course with the nuclear armed states. And what we're actually seeing is more investments into nuclear weapons. So while the numbers have come down, the modernization is what they call it, because it sounds like they're just sort of upgrading or improving them, but really they're, for safety reasons, and that's the way they try and sell it. But that's not actually what's happening. What's actually happening is they're investing in future generations of nuclear weapons in order to maintain their arsenals into the future. They're upgrading the missiles and the bombers and the submarines that all of these go on. They're upgrading the labs that create all of this mess. So it's a massive financial investment that has been going on now for several years. It is not just tied to the new announcement from Trump about increased military spending. These are investments that came under the Obama administration here in the US. The Obama administration spent more than any president since Reagan on nuclear weapons and had committed to spending even more. And we're also seeing it in Russia, the United Kingdom, France, India. Every country that has nuclear weapons is investing in their arsenal. So we have that happening. Then we also have simultaneously a failure of these states to comply with their disarmament obligations. Under international law, they are actually supposed to eliminate nuclear weapons. They're supposed to negotiate with each other and figure out a way to do it. And they've been obliged to do that since 1970. So it's been a while. And nothing has happened on that, absolutely nothing. We've had a few bilateral agreements between Russia and the United States, but overall, there hasn't really been a lot of progress. So in the midst of all this frustration, concern about the fact that there are still 15,000 genocidal weapons, as Bruce said, suicidal weapons in the world, countries that don't have these weapons and civil society, in particular those of us with the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, felt that there must be something that we can do. There has to be something that we can do, even though we don't have these weapons. We don't have the so-called power that goes along with having big militaries. There has to be something collectively that we can do about this situation. And so it took a couple years, but we really wrenched the discourse back. For anyone studying political theory and rhetoric, it's a really fascinating study in discourse change. Away from this notion of deterrence that Bruce was talking about at the beginning, towards the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons use and testing, and bringing it right back to human beings and the environment. And so it took a couple of years to sort of have that discourse change, reverberate throughout the international system. But that being successful, it led us to the point of what can we do in terms of international law? And the glaring gap when it comes to nuclear weapons is that they are not prohibited. Chemical weapons are, biological weapons are, cluster munitions, landmines, blinding laser weapons. These are all prohibited weapon systems, and somehow nuclear weapons are not prohibited because the very few countries that have them have refused to allow that to happen. So we thought, well, we'll just do that. You can't stop us from doing that. We can't take your weapons away, but we can make them illegal under international law. Once they caught wind of what we were doing, massive backlash, of course. We had recently in October, the Obama administration writing to all of its allies, particularly in NATO, and also allies like Japan and Australia, instructing them not to participate in the negotiations of this treaty. And to some extent that was successful. There are, all of NATO except for the Netherlands is boycotting. The Netherlands is participating because they were forced to do so by their parliament. And so national campaigns in other NATO countries are trying to do this as well now. But for the most part, these countries, they all rely on US nuclear weapons in their security postures. So they say that they are reliant on this deterrent concept, that they won't be attacked by anyone because the US will use nuclear weapons on their behalf. So it's all of these countries that somehow still support nuclear weapons as a security instrument that have refused to participate. But that's okay, because that just means that we're going to be able to negotiate a really good treaty with the 130 other governments in the world. So we still have the vast majority of states that are participating in these negotiations. And last week, I think people were really nervous about how it was going to go. It was the first round for these talks, and it was impressive. It was one of the best weeks I think we've ever seen at the UN. Certainly in the disarmament field, it's the best week we've ever seen in the UN. We had great dialogue amongst states, really productive and progressive positions being put forward on this treaty. We had the best interaction with NGOs that we've ever seen at the UN in disarmament. And the underlying sort of pulse to all of this, which was really interesting, was this turnover of power dynamics. We really upended it in a way that we haven't seen before, where we had 130 countries that don't matter negotiating a treaty with the powerful states freaking out about it outside the room and threatening their allies and trying to peel them off and holding meetings with them, don't do this to us, etc. So, but states are going ahead with it, and they're doing it in coordination with civil society, very tight coordination with civil society. And we have a voice in the room that we don't usually get to have on disarmament matters or on many other matters as well. So where do we go from here? In terms of the negotiations themselves, the president of the conference, who's the ambassador of Costa Rica, she will be releasing a draft text probably in late May. Negotiations start up again at the UN on the 15th of June, and they'll go for 3 weeks until the 7th of July. And that's when they'll really hammer out this draft text into something that hopefully we can adopt on July 7th. This is historic, unprecedented. It would be amazing. The idea of how we use this treaty once we have it is that it will affect not just the legal categorization of nuclear weapons, but also the way that they can be engaged with politically, economically, and socially. So the process of banning these weapons before we even have the treaty is reigniting debate around the world about whether governments should be supporting nuclear weapons or supporting the ban treaty. It's really become a very black and white question. You're either for nuclear weapons or you're against them. You can't say that we want ultimate disarmament and boycott a treaty to prohibit these weapons of mass destruction. You have to make a choice. And so we're putting that question out politically. We're hoping to economically affect investments in nuclear weapons. One thing that we've seen with other weapon systems that have been prohibited is that once they are banned, people don't want to be associated with them. So banks and corporations can be compelled to divest their funds from nuclear weapon producing enterprises. So that's something that we're also going to pursue. So it's a little bit of an end run around the power structures and all of the obstacles that stand in your way when you're trying to accomplish something that seems monolithic and oppressive, to sort of poke at all the weak nodes and see if we can sort of topple the beast from upsetting it from as many different points as possible. And in the process of this also, the last thing I wanted to mention was just that we're also going to be doing a lot of public mobilization around this. So June 17th in New York City, there's going to be a big public march and rally across the street from the UN, and hopefully you can all join. We're also encouraging people to organize sister marches. So that the website for that is womenbanthebomb.org. It's a women's-led initiative, but inclusive of everyone, styled after the Women's March on Washington. So hopefully that'll be another big opportunity for everyone to engage with this on a social level. Thanks.
See what I mean? Ray mentioned Costa Rica. Costa Rica happens to be one of my favorite countries. I heard Roberto Zamora speak, and he talked about how the Costa Rican Constitution bans any military. They have no military at all. I said, who are we going to go to war against anyway? I mean, why should we even have a military? It's a very sensible country. It has the highest standard of living in Central America. Really doesn't have any more resources than any of the neighbors. Their greatest resource is that they don't have a military, and they actually spend their money on schools and hospitals and infrastructure, so something to think about. Our next speaker is a very good friend of mine, Hiro Sakurai, who represents Soka Gakkai International. He's the immediate past chair of the NGO Committee on Disarmament, Peace, and Security. He's somehow talked me into taking that position, but whenever I need advice, I always go to Hiro, and he tells me what I need to do. So I depend on him a lot to do the job I do as chairing this committee. Soka Gakkai International, together with Rissho, Kosei-kai, and a few other organizations that I can name, they're part of what is called engaged Buddhism. And they're a really powerful and very important force that a lot of Westerners don't know enough about. And what Hiro is going to talk about today is interfaith cooperation, and it's one thing we certainly strive for here at the United Nations, and I know a lot of our congregations are doing interfaith work. So I invite you to welcome Hiro Sakurai to talk about interfaith cooperation.
Thank you, Bruce, for extremely kind and inaccurate introduction. It's beyond what I deserve. So anyway, thank you. And thank you, UUA, for putting together such a wonderful panel and kindly inviting me. And also I'd like to thank Rissho Kosei-kai for having us all here. And so what I'm going to talk about is both interfaith cooperation, and also later I would like to also speak about youth engagement, since half of the room, or more than half of the room, is young and fresh faces, and including, despite the ages. Anyway, I think Ray really put the current context so nicely, and historic moment that she mentioned, an exciting time really. I'm gonna kind of step back a little bit, and not to give you a negative picture or anything, but also share the need for more and more public outreach, mobilization, as also Greg mentioned. So last week I was also attending the Ban Treaty negotiations, and there was another conference at the event, and there was a conference on the Convention of the Law of Sea, Ocean, and it was a prep camp, one of those preparatory meetings. But probably the attendance was about the same, both member states and civil society, which really gave me a little bit of a puzzling kind of a thing. And then, also 2 weeks before, there was an annual session of the Commission on the Status of Women, and as some of you may know, it's the highest participating conference at the event, and I just checked the right number for this meeting, and it was nearly 4,000 participants from civil society, and the registration is somewhere like 8,000. So, and that happens every year, and although we have such a core committed group of people, civil society, working on the youth disarmament for Ban Treaty negotiations, we also need to reach out massively. And so Ray mentioned, recent development of humanitarian consequence discourse. I think interfaith cooperation has been re-energized, and like last week, I just wanted to mention very quickly that the group of faith communities got together, and we issued a joint statement, and read by a representative from Pax Christi during the conference, and also we had interfaith visual every morning throughout the week, 5 days. And we also got together and planned for the next session in June and July. And I wrote a copy of the joint statement. And one of the things that we discussed at the planning meeting, a group of representatives who were participating last week, was, let's not walk away from this joint statement. Let's use this to reach out farther. So I thought that this is such a wonderful opportunity for me to introduce this document to all of you so that you can decide to sign on. And we would like to keep you informed of any upcoming opportunities that you may want to be participating. So I hope I have enough copies, so I'll put it somewhere after the meeting. So that's one thing I wanted to share. And also, actually, I don't know if you know the religious NGOs at the event can be a really strong force, but just to give you a number of how many religious NGOs accredited at the UN among all the NGOs. And so there are three categories at the UN in terms of NGOs: general status, special status, and roster. General, which those NGOs work on multiple issues, and special status work on a single issue, and roster is third category. And for special status, actually, the 64% of the NGOs are religious, and the 11% of the general status also religious, and the 25% of NGOs roster status is religious. So there is a strong force, but many religious NGOs tend to focus on other issues such as sustainable development, social development, indigenous people, human rights, and so we really would like to mobilize more, religious community into this nuclear disarmament forum. So now I'm turning to the youth engagement. So my organization, as Bruce mentioned, Soka International, we had a declaration issued calling for the abolition of nuclear weapons in 1957 at the height of Cold War, and the especially tasked youth members to take a lead on this effort. And since then, particularly the youth members have been working on nuclear disarmament issues, especially on education, non-formal, grassroots, community-based. So I have brought some educational materials that we have created, and wanted to donate this to you for your use, and just wanted to explain. These are also 5 books, and 3 from Hiroshima, and 1 from Okinawa, Nagasaki, and the rest is Okinawa, all made by the youth component of Soka Gakkai in Japan. And for 3 Hiroshima, 1 is the testimony of the women who experienced wartime in Hiroshima, and another one is men, and the third one is family. So there's some kind of variation, and even though you see Japanese language, but don't worry, it's English Japanese was included, so not asking you to read Japanese. And also, we created a DVD of testimonies of Hibakusha. All women, 8 women, 4 from Hiroshima and 4 from Nagasaki. And it's a DVD and in various languages: English, Spanish, French, Japanese, Chinese, and Chinese, 2 Chinese. And so those we use in order to for public awareness and facilitate dialogue and so forth. And so those are made by the youth and also utilized by youth. And we also have a lot of intergenerational activities. Both the young working with the adults and the activities. So what we often find is education, multi-dimension aspects of education. Those who organize these educational activities often find themselves learning by doing and learning from the participants who get inspired. So it's very much multiple, mutual process. And I would like to end by my own experience, being part of the educational effort in the past. It was an exhibit on nuclear disarmament, and I was a guide, showing the visitors, what's written, what's on the panel and everything. And I met a person who, really, I was engaged in dialogue with him, and I actually gave this DVD because he was so enthusiastic, and he was really pleased, and he said that, actually, I'm an auto mechanic. I see clients, all kinds of clients every day. So I'm going to watch this and start telling people about this. And this was a really eye-opening experience, humbling experience that, everybody has an indispensable role to play. So thanks so much.
See, I told you. Great man. Thank you so much, Hiro. Love working with you. Our next speaker is our only UU speaker that I know of. Maybe there's some secret UUs, but I don't know. And Glen Thomas Rideout, if any of you have been to GA, you have been inspired by his music, by his poetry. If you Google him, as we have at the UU, there are some really wonderful YouTube videos of his speaking, and he really has thought very deeply about inner city violence, about gun violence, about basically the issues that we're facing, and what we need to do as UUs about it, and how we need to reshape our perceptions, kind of refresh our thinking. So I'm very eager to hear what he has to say. I'm inspired by him, by everything that he does, his music, his poetry, and his speaking, and I know you will be too. Please welcome Glen Thomas Rideout.
Good afternoon, everyone. I come from a church background where we call and respond. It's a way that we show that the community is still alive and still awake. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. It's very, very, very good to see you. It's a distinct pleasure to be in this room and in this conversation along with you. I bring you greetings from First Unitarian Universalist congregation of Ann Arbor, where I serve as Director of Worship and Director of Music. I thought I should share with you something that has absolutely nothing to do with this before I begin. And that's, I have what's called an Apple Watch, of course. And the deep introvert that I am, as the speakers were finishing up, got me very, very, very nervous. And at the moment that it was time for me to get up, my watch said, "Time to stand." And I don't know if that made me more or less nervous. When I was a child, I was a part of a choir named the Messengers of Joy. It was a gospel choir, a children's gospel choir at Hemingway Temple African Methodist Episcopal Church in South Baltimore. And in that choir, we would go every Saturday to rehearsal, and we would sing all the way to choir rehearsal. And I would be so excited because we were the choir in town that would sing the latest gospel hits, the ones that you heard on the radio, and I felt so in the know about the cutting edge of gospel music. And as a child, I felt so unbelievably cool in that moment. Except for February. Every single February, we had to sing the same old songs year in and year out, and I knew them by the time I was 10 with a fluency that would baffle me to this day. I remember still, we are young, gifted, and black. We must begin to tell our young. There's a world waiting for you. Yours is the quest that's just begun. In the whole world, you know, there's a million boys and girls who are young, gifted, and black. And that's a fact. Man, I hated that song. Every single February, time and time again, we were asked to sing this song, and we were given not much of an option. I wound up leaving that church, not having any idea why we were singing in the first place. 10 years later, I went back after my first year in college, and I had to ask the same director of music why in the world he asked us to sing that song time and time again. And he shared with me that in 1965, in Selma, Alabama, while the people were congregated in Brown Chapel African Methodist Episcopal Church, and the news came down that the Unitarian minister James Reed had died from injuries he sustained while being a part of that protest, the people rose up and sang as a first resort. The people rose up and sang, we shall not be moved. And that tradition of offering names, that tradition of preserving songs of unmitigated hope, that tradition of being a house where justice was never compromised, was the tradition they were preserving for me while I was a child. It was an unbelievable comfort to know that there was a house on one day a week that had my name in mind. All of my family were ministers, and not a master's of theology degree among any of them. But the name, stewardess and minister and reverend, was offered to them because only on this day of the week, only on this day of the week, and only in this context would people who looked like me and darker, and some of lighter shade, would find dignity, would find identity, and would find a name. Why am I telling you this story in a symposium about armed violence? Well, I tell it to you because I see some commonalities that we ought to bring to Unitarian Universalism, I believe, in the current moment. I see the church's role of housing songs of unmitigated hope. And I see these sanctuaries for the bruised and the hurting. And I see that the church plays a role as a source of naming and identifying those who otherwise might be called the last, the lost, the least, the left out, and the looked over. And in these moments, when I look around my own Unitarian Universalist community, And I'm getting to the age where I have to decide whether or not my children will be a part of this faith. I have to ask some sobering questions. You see, my children will be black. My children will be people of color. And people of color are disproportionately the victims of violent crime all over this nation. We know from the World Health Organization that violent death is the fourth leading cause of death around our world for people from the ages of 10 to 29. And we know that leading contributors to the participation in and the victimhood of violence among our youth population in the United States and beyond, among those are poverty, high income inequality, and the fraying of cohesive intergenerational relationships, particularly between people of parent age and child age. We know that in the United States, 89 guns are owned for every 100 Americans. That's compared to 6 in the United Kingdom. We know that 13,000 gun homicides, of the 13,000 gun homicides occurring in the United States in 2015, half of them occurred in 127 cities in the United States, all characterized by intense poverty, low education, racial segregation, and economic inequality. I'm seeing the Black Lives Matter movement, which is reminding us that that in overwhelming numbers, black and brown people are the victims of police brutality. And I'm seeing that in the LGBTQ community that trans women are 6 times more likely to encounter violent assault than other counterparts. And trans women of color are 17 times more likely to suffer violent crime and assault. In this space of wondering what my children will see and the world they will inherit from what we give to them, I need to ask some sobering questions about Unitarian Universalism. I need to ask if it will be a place that is safer for my children than it was for me. I need to ask the question, will my children find a name? Will they see the people around them look more like them? Can we create a truly intergenerational, cohesive, intersectional community that not only values the mention of Black death, but also values the mention and the teaching and the education of Black life? I'm of the opinion that our work is not done until such time as our churches are learning as much from Thurgood as they have been learning from Thoreau. And until we can create a space, until we can create a house of worship with a massive creative effort to rename, to increase the identification of those who are the most marginalized, until we engage in a massive reprioritization of what worship looks like and what our hiring practices look like and what our principles say about our faith community and its opposition to white supremacy and racism. Until we can all engage in the process that makes Unitarian Universalism safer space for my child than it was for me, then the questions will remain. I think that with the massive massive task of disarming ourselves and our world, we can begin with worship. We can begin by turning our identifying spaces on, for most of us, Sunday mornings, into creative interchanges where you and your voice and your voice and my voice and my children's voices are what inhabit and build the foundation for everything we do. Listen to me now. I am talking about radically dismantling the way we meet on Sunday morning.
Let's do it.
I'm talking about breaking down what we know to be worship, what we know to be our stalwart meeting place. And I know that that's an uncomfortable prospect for many of us. It's why I do it with a smile. But if we are to engage in the process, where not only the marginalized lives matter to us, but we begin to matter to the marginalized lives, we must begin with the hard work of re-identifying, renaming, and completely reforming the voice that we put out to our visitors and to ourselves. It will take a lot of work, but I'm coming to the young people and to the religious professionals who are currently in work to say, now is the time, before we calcify ourselves in the same practices which keep us from the goal of intergenerational, massively deep, moving community for everyone who walks in the door. If you agree with me, then you've signed up for some hard work. And I think you're right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We need this leadership so much. Isaac and I, my husband and I, joined the Church of All Souls in Washington, D.C. in 2005. I brought Isaac into the church kicking and screaming. He did not want to go there at all. And what he found in that particular congregation were people that looked like us racially and as a gay couple. There was music, there was good gospel music in the All Souls Church in Washington, D.C. And so it felt welcoming to both of us. Not perfect, not where we need to be, but a lot closer to where I think we need to be than a lot of our congregations that I've seen since, that I've talked across the country. So I think the leadership that we've seen here from Glen Thomas and from other leaders is what we need to listen to very carefully and give people what they want to see themselves in the congregation. And for a lot of people, they don't see themselves in the congregations that we have. They see a bit of Boston maybe, but not their own experiences. So I hope we can inform them that way. And now to our last speaker. Thank you. Chris King works in the office that we really work with on all of the issues. It's the United Nations Office of Disarmament Affairs. Really great people there that depend very much, and I think Chris will validate this, on civil society to support the work that they're doing, because they can't do it by themselves. It's an uphill path. We've heard this throughout. Getting rid of weapons is very hard, because you've got deep moneyed interest, political interest, very powerful nations that are insisting that they're going to inject weapons throughout the world. And it's this office of the United Nations that is battling with very few resources to try to turn that tide and to get rid of these weapons. Chris will talk about the need for disarmament, why getting rid of weapons of mass destruction, but all weapons, is really crucial to making this planet safer for all of us. He and I both were diplomats. I was in the U.S. Foreign Service and he in the Australian Foreign Service before coming to the UN. And we both served in India, so we have that in common. So please welcome Chris King to the podium.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Good afternoon. I like this. I'm going to have this in every UN meeting that I go to. First of all, let me say thank you to our hosts, and I want to say thank you to you. I want to say you didn't tell me that we were allowed to sing, Bruce, so that could have changed things.
Go for it.
Always. And I think that if I'd known I was following that, I probably would have not wanted to go last. So, suffice to say, as Bruce said, I am Australian. I do not have a translator with me, so if anything doesn't actually make sense, just ask me afterwards. And as Bruce said, I do work for the United Nations. I know that you've obviously had quite an intense session. I know that your keynote speaker spoke a fair bit about nuclear weapons and the damage of nuclear weapons today, and you've had 4 incredible presentations this afternoon. So what I want to do is kind of wrap it up, and as Bruce said, talk about weapons. And I wanted to start with 3 quotes, and they're not really for the weaker stomach, so I apologise in advance if this is not PG-13. But the first quote is, "There were people crying out for help, calling after members of their family. I saw a schoolgirl with her eye hanging out of its socket. People looked like ghosts, bleeding and trying to walk before collapsing. Some had lost limbs. There were charred bodies everywhere, including in the river. I looked down and saw a man clutching a hole in his stomach, trying to stop his organs from spilling out. The smell of burning flesh was overpowering." The second quote, "I just had to watch a woman lose 3 of her children who were killed. 30 people just got killed not far from here. We were just there yesterday. It's a marketplace. 30 people just got killed. We've had so many dead bodies." And the third quote says, "Between 1970 and 2000, there was a rise in the phenomenon of child soldiers as we know it today, mainly due to the ready availability of small arms. In fact, corroborating research points to findings that it takes an average of 40 minutes for a child to master an AK-47. So those 3 quotes come from a hibakusha, a survivor of an atomic bomb, from an aid worker in the Middle East, in a country that you've probably heard a lot about, and from a former UN Special Representative for Children in Armed Conflict. Now, in case you haven't had enough facts thrown at you today, I'm going to throw some more at you. More than 1.5 billion humans live in fragile and conflict-affected states or in countries with high levels of crime. The number of civil wars in the world has tripled over the past decade, from 4 in 2007 to 11 in 2014. The number of direct conflict deaths has risen from 56,000 in 2008 to 180,000 in 2014. Increasingly, heavy weapons are being used in conflict, from heavy artillery to barrel bombs. And Ray's already said there are 15,000 nuclear weapons left in the world, most of which would make the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki look like firecrackers. And what she didn't say was that recent studies have pointed out that what we call a limited nuclear war, so around the exchange of 100 nuclear weapons, would probably create enough smoke that would block out the sun and cause a famine that would kill 2 billion people. So, chemical weapons have returned as tools of war on the battlefield and have been used unforgivably against civilian populations. We've seen recent events in the Middle East and elsewhere have demonstrated that nerve agents like sarin and VX have not been consigned to the pages of history. They're very real. Ebola and MERS have shown how quickly deadly pathogens can cross borders. As the technological and cost barriers to the creation of biological weapons keep getting lower and lower, the prospect of a deliberate release pandemic is becoming increasingly real, and we are not prepared to deal with that kind of outbreak. We're witnessing how a suite of emerging technologies, from artificial intelligence to cyber technologies to 3D printings to drones, are being militarized and used to transform the way that wars are being fought. And finally, as Secretary General Guterres recently said, ours is a world of new and old conflicts woven into a complex, interconnected web, where global tensions are rising, sabers have been rattled, and dangerous words spoken about the use of nuclear weapons. And who is it that bears the brunt of all of these trends? Civilians. Civilian populations. So I'm not saying this because, I want everyone to leave here really depressed and go home, although I am a very unpopular dinner party guest, I will say that much. What I'm saying is that the connecting factor here is weapons, and the social and human cost of weapons. And I'm saying that because the flip side is, it's to stress the importance of disarmament as a critical element of conflict resolution and peace building. Historically, disarmament has played an important role in ending existing conflicts and preventing the outbreak of new strife. Disarmament and arms control processes provide the breathing space for confidence to be built, stability to be strengthened, and trust to be established. This was true during the Cold War, and it's true today. Maybe, just maybe, one of the reasons we're facing all of these dire trends that I was talking about is because we have forgotten the important role that disarmament can play. So, we say, what does disarmament actually mean? Because it does have different meanings for different people. In the United Nations context, disarmament means the complete elimination of weapons of mass destruction and the strict regulation of conventional arms in accordance with the United Nations Charter. So, the gold standard, of course, for any disarmament treaty is that it be universal, legally binding, effective, irreversible, and verifiable. Disarmament is a founding principle of the United Nations. Article 26 of the UN Charter calls for the maintenance of international peace and security with the least diversion of human and economic resources for armaments. It also tasks the Security Council with developing a plan for the international regulation of armaments. The Charter does not mention nuclear weapons, but this is largely because it was actually signed before the first nuclear weapon was ever tested. So that was remedied in 1946 when the very first General Assembly resolution called for the elimination of nuclear weapons and all other weapons adaptable to mass destruction. We have three-pronged, what we call the disarmament machinery. You have the first committee of the General Assembly, which is dedicated to peace and security and disarmament. You have the Conference on Disarmament, which is a multilateral negotiating body in Geneva, and you have the United Nations Disarmament Commission, which is a deliberative body. And then, of course, you have my office, the Office for Disarmament Affairs. We're part of the Secretariat, and our job is to assist member states. So we provide advocacy, advice, administration, coordination, and education for all member states on disarmament. And our issues cover the gamut of everything that we've talked about here today, from conventional weapons to nuclear weapons and biological weapons, and these emerging trends and threats that I've been talking about, like cybersecurity or artificial intelligence. And, over the last 70 years, we've achieved a lot. As Ray said, we've seen massive reductions in nuclear stockpiles. Obviously not massive enough, but we've certainly seen massive reductions. And we have a suite of treaties that have done things from banning nuclear tests in the atmosphere, creating Antarctica as a nuclear weapon-free zone, prohibiting the placement of nuclear weapons on the seabed or on the moon and outer space. And we prohibited chemical weapons, we prohibited biological weapons. We have an arms trade treaty which regulates the $1.7 trillion arms trade. We have the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, which prohibits inhumane weapons or weapons that are counted in international humanitarian law. And as Ray said, most recently we've had two very, very hopeful developments. The first is the Prohibition Treaty, which I think we all are praying will be the commencement of a wave that gets us to finally eliminate nuclear weapons, like completely remove them. And we've also had the link last year in the Sustainable Development Goals that finally made the link between development and disarmament through Goal 16.4, which looks at removing the illicit arms trade in small arms and light weapons. But sadly, outside of these achievements, there's precious little going on. Divisions between states are growing, as we've heard today. Big divisions between the so-called powerful states and the not so powerful states. We see dialogues that are dead. We've seen the multilateral disarmament machinery turn into stagnant ponds where the only noises are the ad nauseum repetition of standard talking points. We see people talking past each other, not to each other. And one of the key excuses we hear today, and I think Ray touched on this briefly as well, was that one of the excuses we hear for the lack of progress is the need for countries to maintain their militaries for the sake of strategic stability. We hear that conditions are not right for the pursuit of disarmament, and particularly for nuclear disarmament. And this is an exceptionally narrow understanding of history and of how stability is actually achieved. So, for example, as difficult as the international situation is today, the current tensions fall well short of what President Reagan and General Secretary Gorbachev faced during the Cold War, and yet somehow they managed to see a little bit of sense. We had the Reykjavik Agreement, obviously, over 30 years old last year. The pursuit of arms control and disarmament is exactly how we can break deadlocks and reduce tension to resolve and prevent conflicts. Dialogue and transparency lessen risks and build confidence among states. Curtailing the development of new types of weapons, both WMD and conventional, prevents new arms races, thereby providing stability. And when it comes to nuclear disarmament, we hear that this cannot happen because it would make the world a more dangerous place that would be prone to conventional wars. And this is where I want to go back to how the UN defines disarmament. The complete elimination of weapons of mass destruction and the strict regulation of conventional weapons. So in other words, while nuclear weapons will always be the priority, largely because they are the only existential weapon, right for now, we've always recognised in the UN that WMD disarmament and conventional disarmament have to go hand in hand. And together with other instruments such as forums for the peaceful resolution of disputes, these are key components of a larger system for the maintenance of international peace and security. Final point I want to touch on is, as Kurt Vonheim, who was the fourth Secretary General of the United Nations, said, the UN is as good or as bad as its members permit it to be. There's no such thing as the UN without its member states. And ultimately how it behaves and what it does and what we talk about, the UN must do this or the UN must do that, is a decision for member states. Disarmament, particularly in the UN, cannot be static. It needs to evolve and adapt to the age we live in. And it is up to member states to ensure that the UN disarmament machinery and the policy that it produces is fit for purpose. This requires meaningful dialogues at the depth. It means real conversations, innovative thinking, and a willingness to compromise for the greater good. It takes political will. Now, shaping member state behaviour is where you come in. You are the global public. You are the constituencies. I think, and again I keep quoting Reagan, but people did, there is a dire need for awareness raising in education because people think that disarmament, particularly nuclear disarmament, was a problem that ended with the Cold War. I gave a talk to a group of students last week, and I asked them, where would nuclear weapons come on your list of threats? And none of them would even put it in the top 10. And if they do, it's North Korea or it's Iran. They were far more worried about terrorism. They were far more worried about Russia. And, some of these things are obviously interlinked, but the point is that people do not see disarmament as a viable peacemaking tool. Or they think the problem is intractable. What can I do as an individual? What is it that can I do? So we need convincing arguments that nuclear weapons do not provide stability or security. That continued arm races bankrupt treasuries, divert money away from causes that need it the most, and that conflict destroys societies and economies. How? Well, we're here to help however we can. If you're interested in this subject matter, go to our website, un.org/disarmament. It's a veritable treasure trove of all the information you could ever want on disarmament. Then, of course, there's our partners in civil society. And as Bruce said, we are reliant on civil society because civil society are the expert. They're the people at the coalface, and they are our global conscience. We're stuck between member states. They are not. And so, come join the rally. That's a great place to start. Or get online. I mean, we live in an age of social media. If Facebook, Twitter, whatever, that's a great place to sign up and get your opinions out there or listen to other people's opinions. But I think finally, in this country, the ballot box is the ultimate rejoinder. And, security issues do factor into elections. Think about how much people worried about terrorism when they're in the last election, how much terrorism was hyped up as a threat. Well, maybe instead of terrorism, if it was fear of nuclear apocalypse that was motivating people to vote and politicians to make policy, we'd actually make a difference in this regard. So the problems that we face, they're urgent and they can seem overwhelming, but they're not insurmountable. We need to bridge divides between positions. We need to put these issues back on the front page, and we need to reignite the flame of common cause. I look forward to working with all of you as we try to make this world a peaceful and more prosperous one. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you very much for this entire panel. Give them another panel. And one last thanks to Rissho Sakurai for letting us use this